Mondrian influenced modern architecture, but it had no interest for him. He thought architects were hopeless materialists. He envisaged a new shape, architectural environment all over the world that would be pure flat plains, lacking solidity of any kind. I don't know how that would work, and I suspect Mondrian didn't either. He's tough on what he thinks of as deception. He wants to get to truth. He's dealing all the time with ideas, but the main one is visual order. He provides a visual organisation so elegant and complex that it's capable of endless reinterpretation. But you've got to recognise in the first place that it is visual. And if the particular nature of that organisation, pure abstraction, accords with Mondrian's theosophical beliefs, namely that everything we see around us is only an illusion. Maya is the Indian word for that illusion, adopted by Theosophy as Theosophy adopts terms from all religions. So a purely abstract painting is more true to the real reality that lies behind everything than a painting that attempts to capture aspects of the illusion version of that higher reality. That is a mind twist as well as a sentence twist. Nevertheless, the painting is a visual work of art that demands to be seen on its own visual terms.
Right, now this has to go down.
Nature doesn't disappear in abstract art. Nature's laws are condensed into a visual form. That's the rule Tess Jarre follows. Paintings that combine all sorts of processes, including printing instead of painting.
I have to clean that up pretty fast.
I see you're doing something that has to be quite precise, but precision isn't the meaning of what you're doing.
Absolutely not. Precision is only ever a tool. It should look as though there is an ambiguity between what is in front and what is behind. You can't quite tell, and that is a way of engaging people with the object.
As you say, there's an ambiguity about the front and the behind. There's a sort of flicker between the two
Yes.
colours.
Exactly that. So you're not just being presented with something, you are being asked to participate.
Yes.
So that if
So in
you're
looking,
behind-
you're kind of part of the
Yes.
process of what's happening.
Yes.
But you're doing small things here that one could pick up and hold almost like an icon or timeless objects. You are doing things that are very, very resolutely abstract, can have only a couple of colours. There's a certain type of surface, very much a physical thing as well as an optical thing.
I think that's incredibly important. I mean, in a way, this is how we see the world. Everything is surface.
Yeah.
You know, when I talk to you, that's all I'm seeing. Because I want the colour to be as intense as possible, I get it screen print with oil-based ink. If I use paint,
Yeah.
it's almost impossible to get a completely smooth surface. The more evidence you have on a surface of the way it's done, the less you're going to understand or feel the intensity of the colour.
Right.
I mean, I would like to reduce everything down to its essentials, so
Yeah.
in that way it's kind of following nature.
So you're very, very concentrated visual events in a way. They're a concentrated, honed, condensed version of reality, of the world.
Exactly that.
Very simplified shapes.
And I try to say it with as little added, as little pretension, as directly as I mean, this whole very complicated system is really set up in order to produce something that looks as though it's totally simple and it's just popped into the world.
Jesus inside geometric shapes. This is an icon in the Byzantine style from the 15th century. The Russian abstract artist Malevich respected this look. Byzantine art stripped down the realistic style that existed in Greek and Roman times, art that shows in detail how reality looks. So a higher reality can be contemplated. Byzantine art ditched the detailed look in favour of simple signs. And for the same reason, Malevich displayed his abstract paintings as if they were icons in a Russian church. He's offering a modern proposal about simple signs serving a higher reality. The rule that form is feeling. Kandinsky stated it, but Malevich took it to the furthest extreme. When Malevich created his pure geometric abstract art style, which he called suprematism, in 1915, the First World War was underway. There were food shortages, collapsing morale. There was despair at brutality and death. The following year, Malevich was a soldier in the army himself. You're looking at squares again. What are these ones doing? Two of them. One black, one red. One large, one small. One tilted, suggesting movement.
Paint is capable of so much more than this, so we know we're being told about extreme limitation. Two squares surrounded by white. There's a set of mathematical relationships there where shapes and spaces are made to seem visually equivalent. So the black shape is the same as the white space underneath it. The white space to the right of the red shape is somewhat the same as the red shape. There's a sense throughout of this is this, this is this, this is the same as this. Movement implied by something very, very small. You'd think you couldn't get much more reduced than that. But this painting was done very shortly after he created a work called The Black Square, the most famous abstract painting in history.
He redid the original version several times because its surface cracked. This 1923 version is a delight of velvety, rich, granulated, brushy blackness. The creation of something out of nothing, a painted something.
There's something absurd about it, as if with suprematism there's a rightness of shapes, but insanity about how he got to that rightness.
He said the logical consequence of no one ever being able to put back together all the fragmented bits of reality in cubism is that art should take the next step and abandon logic, embrace its absence.
Malevich was offered a word for no-logic creativity by the poets he knew. The word was zeum. The poets wrote manifestos for a changed future in which the food shortages would be solved by transforming soil into bread. Horses would be free and there'd be equal rights for cows.
Where you might make out a table with a violin on it in a Picasso Cubist painting, a Malevich Cubist painting would have a violin with a cow on it. His friends called themselves futurists. He put on an opera with them in 1913. He provided sketches for costumes and sets. And 2 years later, he elaborated this sketch into The Black Square.
He painted it in a kind of ecstasy. He couldn't sleep or eat, he was so jangled. It all seemed clear. He wrote that the black square equals feeling, the white field equals the void, beyond feeling. Supreme, in the word suprematism, the name that Malevich gave to his geometric style, means supreme over reality. He said that the objects that make up this world are not reality. They might call forth feeling, but feeling separated from reality is the only true reality.
He means the objects out there that we assume to make up objective reality don't really. In fact, it's only by abstracting objects that we can get to reality. This has a long title, but part of it is the term fourth dimension. It was fascinating to artists. Time warped by space, or the other way around.
Ordinary existence warps into higher existence in the fourth dimension. That was the claim of the Russian theosophist P.D. Uspensky. Malevich absorbed the theosophical lesson, like so many abstract artists then, and built it into his paintings. Abstraction soaring into the beyond.
He explained to his students, "We've come to the rejection of reason, but only because there's a new form of reason now." Some of Malevich's students would become the new Russian avant-garde that would make him seem old-fashioned. They were called constructivists. One of them was Lyubov Popova. This is a design by her for the cover of a magazine from 1922. The fact that it is abstraction turned to a functional use tells you about the turn taken in the early 20s by abstract art in Russia.
Clarity, powerful look-atability, but it's not about contemplating the ineffable. It's about making a magazine attractive and looking at new things, because it's a magazine of new kino, new cinema. To appreciate that as a jump as radical as abstraction being invented in the first place, you have to look once again at what abstraction is.
Abstraction strips everything down to form, but form can be radically different from instance to instance, even though it looks like it's just more form. This painting by Popova from 1917 was influenced by Malevich's teaching. The difference between it and her magazine cover from a few years later, when she'd become a constructivist, is that form isn't feeling for the constructivists. Form is useful. There'd been World War and Civil War. Now there was extreme poverty, violence, hunger, breakdown of communication and transport, and out of all that, not just a new society had to be built, but a type that had never existed before on Earth. The constructivists identified the factories as the centre of production. Art should move there. They even changed the name of art to production. This is a productivist sculpture by one of Popova's colleagues, Vladimir Steenberg. This form could be a prototype for what a socialist society would actually look and feel and be like, as opposed to how such a society had been theorised and dreamed of before the revolution. Popova's shapes and spaces were for definite things. These ones were for a banner for a revolutionary poets' club. This was the cover of a catalogue for a constructivist exhibition. The controllers of the new revolutionary state were sceptical, and eventually they did crush constructivism and productivism. Well, how are you really going to connect art to politics? Lenin said to the constructivists when he visited them in the new art schools his government set up and paid for, when there was very little money for anything. Popova taught constructivists, and she exhibited with them. They saw no reason to drop abstract form just because no one could understand it. She died at 35 from scarlet fever after only a few months of success in the factories with clothing designs based on geometric form. And the whole constructivist, productivist movement was destroyed by Politburo decrees about form. Abstraction relating to reality was out. Reality had to be conveyed from now on by picturing instead, by propaganda. Constructivism failed. Abstract form would never again automatically mean left politics. It turns out when you make something, you can't necessarily control its meaning. Abstraction in Europe went quiet in the 1930s with the rise of fascism in the West and totalitarian communism in Russia. The end of the Second World War in 1945 saw a revival of abstraction in lonely studios in New York. Changing the world by cosmic visions, by spirituality, or art giving a concrete form to socialism were not the idea's context for abstraction anymore. Being an individual, being an outsider, making those on the inside, the conformists, see what freedom could be. These were the new ideas. Many people think the rule of this artist is no rules at all. In fact, you're seeing a rigidly architectural structure achieved by nothing but free, loose, flowing open marks. It's an amazing balancing act once you start to see it. And it shows that the standard criticism of Jackson Pollock, that anyone could do it, is unfair.
Paint, very liquefied, only black, no other colour, thrown onto the canvas, and very briefly titled Number 32.
The painting was done one day in 1950, with the canvas rolled out onto the wooden floorboards in his studio in New York, in a rural part of the state, a few hours' drive from the city. 10 years before, he'd been in therapy with a Jungian analyst, trying to deal with the alcoholism that defined Pollock's life as much as being an artist defined it. He brought his drawings to the sessions. Later, their lines and spaces would be exploded to become paintings on a vast architectural scale. He said he was painting the aims of the age, and he didn't need to paint nature because he was nature. looks pretty free. There's something outrageously free about an artist throwing paint and stepping on the painting. But freedom is a meaning he wants to get across. It comes from the climate of the times. It is not the visual end result that his outlandish process will actually create. However he gets there, he ends up with a tightly controlled rhythmic structure. The canvas is regularly and rhythmically occupied. Imagine the lighter lines without the heavier blobs. Never mind how they're created, they contribute to the visual complexity. It would be a very different effect. The web of lines and angles goes out to meet the outer edges of the painting, pulling back, flowing out, all around those edges. So what happens on the perimeter is a controlled version of what's happening in the centre. You read the meaning through what is impossible to miss, the materials and how they're treated. You're forced to see that the paint is paint, with its dried lumpy bits and delicate stained bits, its range of textures, reflective paint contrasted with paint that has been absorbed by the canvas. Those textures are the things he's composing. Their differences are what he makes a visual symphony out of. An artist today in Deptford making something harmonious. Paul Tonkin, like Jackson Pollock, his rule is that harmony can come from a surprisingly wild process.
This is just what I do, really. I just make these. It's just a question of covering it with paint, basically. But I like making these curvy shapes.
I suppose someone looking at it now might think, oh, landscape, hills, lakes. Is anything like that in your mind?
No, I'm just trying to get the stuff on there. But yeah, I see what you mean. Of course. It could be like the Loch Ness Monster as well, couldn't it? Except if something starts looking too much like something very specific, then I might try and change it. Yes. Where shall I put the red?
How do you know where to put the blue and the yellow?
That's a good point. But now it's getting more complicated, you see. But I'm treating it like a painting, which I do, you see. And it's not.
So we're looking at the creation of an underpainting, and you. Yeah. This is part of this. This is a stage that you always go through.
It's the first stage. It's yeah.
And the underpainting has a certain life of its own and a certain rhythm.
Yes.
But it isn't the painting as such.
Well, when it's dry, I'll look at it and cut it into rectangles, which of different sizes, and then pin them to the floor, and then work on top of them.
And will each of those rectangles be a separate painting?
Yes.
It's got a fantastic energetic movement.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. That's what I want to get, is the movement. But then I'm going to mess it up, you see. That's the fun bit. Yeah. Oh, shit.
Whoa.
I don't usually waste quite as much paint as that.
That was fantastic.
Yeah, but it wasn't kind of what I wanted.
And it looks great as well, but I'm going to move back.
You better move back, Matthew.
Yeah.
You better get out of the way, man, because I'm chucking the stuff around, man.
It's fantastic.
But it's like destroying and creating at the same time.
Yeah.
You know.
It's amazing how beautiful those veils of colour can
be. Well, it is, but unfortunately, when it dries out, it doesn't stay like that. It doesn't. It's not. It's going everywhere. That's quite good. Yeah.
Where do you think the precision is in what you're doing? What's the precision?
Well, it gets more precise. I'd have to show you the later stages to show that it gets very, very precise near the end. It's to do with the drawing, I suppose. And to me, drawing is movement. And colour is the most important thing, and trying to get colours working together so that they actually combine to make something that actually, when you come into the studio and you've seen that painting having had a night's sleep and you're coming in again seeing it fresh in the next morning, it will actually making a statement back to you. And then you feel, actually, this is now a painting, it's actually telling me something.
The next artist is the other side of the same coin of freedom that is controlled in some way. With Dan Perfit, I think his rule is to have totally controlled, calculated stages that result in a look of flowing freedom.
I've got a plan. I like a plan. The improvisation happens in the drawings, in the previous stages to the one we're looking at right now.
And that's a printout from one of your drawings, your coloured drawing.
Here's where it gets scaled up onto a large scale canvas. So these little drawings are like scores.
The drawings that you work from?
These little printout is like a score that I'm performing, like I was a musician performing. So, it gives me the structure, but these marks have got to be made in real time. It doesn't really matter if there's a bit of splashing, because we're just going for the... trying to make the mark as expressive as possible, really get a sense of its speed, its proper real-time quickness.
This is the fastest stage of the whole painting.
This is the fastest stage, maybe the funnest stage as well. Because out of nothing comes something. Suddenly there's a whole bunch of black marks that begin to indicate something. I mean, even though my work is very non-representational, nevertheless it should be evocative.
It suggests a sort of natural world without at all depicting anything in particular.
Well, yes, it does want to feel like part of our natural world, but maybe an imagined correlation of it somehow. How we pull it inside of ourselves and build little models. So it's an introvert's experience of an extrovert world.
Very good. So things come and go in this process.
They really do,
Begin with this, what looks like an armature. That's never really, once that's done, there will never be anything else like that. It comes and goes.
No, it won't look like this. And in fact, much of this painting that I'm doing right now is redundant, will become redundant, rather. Much of it will be obscured. Okay, that's enough of that one. So, yeah.
So this has got to dry now.
It's got to dry. Yeah, we can't have any drips because a drip would indicate gravity.
Yeah.
So I want this really to be floating, like it's like all these things. Look, I want them to feel like they're a bunch of stuff thrown up in the air, and then you've taken a photograph of it.
I see.
As it just reaches its zenith.
In abstract art since Jackson Pollock, there's often a sense that meaning might be as simple as just the way paint is put on. Paint can be applied anyway, sometimes frankly and flatly, as if the surface didn't mean anything, or, which is what these paintings by Mark Rothko are doing, so a sort of breathing surface is the main theme, the main effect by which the painting is able to convey its message. Rothko was a New Yorker whose family immigrated from Russia when he was a child. Until middle age, he was unsuccessful and poor. He sympathised with the revolutionary political movements in the USA in those times. He lived an isolated existence. He was unstable. And so, when success came to him in the 1950s, its suddenness was overwhelming. The paintings we were just looking at were done by him in the late 50s as a commission for the new Seagram building for their exclusive restaurant on the top floor called the Four Seasons. But having painted them, he became furious at the idea of rich bastards, as he called them, eating in front of his work. 10 years later, he gave the paintings away free to what was then the Tate Gallery. He was fanatic about how they should be displayed. The lighting and spacing, even today, is exactly as Rothko wanted. By grim coincidence, he died on the day they arrived in Britain.
Rothko committed suicide, and his paintings don't depict anything. So it's only natural in a way that we should wish that death might be what they're communicating. I don't personally think that. That's a human tragedy. But the meaning of the paintings is different to that. Profound visual lift.
That's the same meaning that a cathedral has, or the inside of an Egyptian tomb or a Greek temple. Death is part of those things as well. But in such a universal sense that it's as if the marvel of the whole of existence, not just its termination point, is being celebrated. Death as part of some kind of gigantic cosmic unity.
Rather than getting carried away with what has become over the years a sort of rhetoric of heavy breathing emotion, let's try instead to understand what these paintings actually are and how they work.
That sense of a surface that is active and expressive gets more and more insistent as you look. Grey is applied lightly, like a mist, diffused, so the surface becomes cloudy, not sheer, animated, not still or inert. The painting as a whole is created in terms of misty breakups and stuttering breakups, and then passages that are all about merging and flowing.
So if the feeling is, well, it's all dark or it's all red, the experience of darkness and redness is a nuanced one.
A simple colour theme of blackish red is elaborated and celebrated, so that the whole of existence is celebrated.
The room is a sort of pharaoh's tomb. In his control freakery, he's a megalomaniac like the pharaohs. He's the pharaoh and the pharaoh's decorator in a Rothko-centric universe. He's the architect, the painter, and the philosopher-priest.
All that pretentiousness would be off-putting if it weren't for the rule of painterly transformation that is the true interest of this abstract art. The quality of surprise in the treatment of a surface so that looming darkness is alive with energy. The rule that colours placed next to each other will always suggest depth, different positions in space, was exciting to artists like Paul Klee and Mark Rothko. and has been followed by Albert Irvin, who's now 92, for 50 years.
Yeah, I'll put it.
So put it down in front of those tins.
Yeah, that's it. And drop it onto the
Yeah. Okay.
onto the back too. And put those under. Oh God, it's nice to have somebody helping.
Well, I better come and be your assistant.
It's a real luxury. They're abstract paintings, but they're informed by my movement through the world.
Those marks seem sort of structural, and they have their own life as
Yeah.
events. Structural in terms of the whole unity, and they have their own personality.
Yes. I'd like to think so. They, insofar as painting is a language, I think the brush marks are the verbs. Although you can probably analyse that out of extinction if you wanted to.
No, I think painting as a language is a good idea. And the brush marks as verbs is a good idea.
There are things behind things. Like in the space of the studio now, if I look across the room, you're standing in front of the wall.
Yeah.
So it's those sort of perceptions.
I understand completely what you're saying, but it's as if reality itself is layered.
Yeah,
And that's the kind of thing that you're looking for in the painting.
yes,
But you're doing it through colour,
yes.
through a rather pure colour.
When I first started painting abstract paintings, I used to use very sombre colours. I had the idea that an important painting had to be a dark earth colours. The horrible thing is washing all these brushes.
I bet.
The visual impressiveness of abstract art from the 1950s and 1910s is carried on by abstract art now, but often not with the old sense of abstract purity. Here's some abstract art that's full of glinting reflections. It's by the Ghanaian artist El Anatsui.
Unlike artists who work on a flat canvas and who create patterns, the visual complexity of which must be structured into the object, El Anatsui allows his work to behave like textiles, and the shadow and light created by the drapery creates an additional focus for what you're looking at, and is part of the thought process involved in the making.
It's a lesson in setting up meaning of a simpler, less philosophical kind than the early abstract artists went in for. He offers a jigsaw of meanings that are abstract but easily readable. Its structure imitates a traditional Ghanaian fabric called kente cloth, woven for centuries by labour-intensive processes, so the visual effect is very rich. Kente cloth is a source of national pride. If history is in the picture, then the history of colonialism must be in there too, with all its human wretchedness. And the materials El Anatsui uses suggest waste and squalor. A work of abstract art made of bottleneck wrappers, the bits of metal foil that go round the neck of a whiskey bottle or a gin bottle. Rubbish, really, scavenged from the street.
He makes it look like gold, but it's old bits of foil. It's rubbish that reads as gold. So there's ambiguity or a double meaning. Baseness that can be transformed into gold, with gold as the good thing. but also baseness might be indistinguishable from or interchangeable with gold. So gold's shimmer, its attractiveness, is untrustworthy.
It always depends where you stand in relation to it as to whether or not gold does shimmer. So maybe the impression of gold here is a metaphor for delusion. The pioneer abstract artists 100 years ago thought abstract values were the path to truth. They took out any meanings to do with history, society, nationhood. Those are the meanings Ella Natsui builds in. He presents you with a powerful visual blast, accompanied by questions about what power might mean. Today all art competes in a market, and purely abstract art is relatively rare. Abstract art that has clues about easily gettable meaning is preferred.
29 million, 30 million, 31 million.
Abstract art of the past gets huge prices today.
77 million 5 and selling.
That much for a Rothko. Not because he's subtle about red and black, but because his high-status name is synonymous with fabulous success. Money is never really the point. Rothko's predecessor, Hilma af Klint, said, W is material, U is spiritual. She really did believe what she was doing could alter the world. If there's a rule of early abstract art as a whole, it is that it was incredibly optimistic. So the rule of optimism passing on is the rule I'm now going to sign off with a work by an artist who was born the same year that Hilma af Klint went up to the spirits in the sky.
Here's a kind of abstract art that is unequivocally visually amazing, but open-ended as to whom that amazement is for and where it's coming from. It's partly sinister because it's about wealth, and we live in a time when wealth is sinister. And it's partly optimistic because wealth is referred to by rubbish, old bits of thrown away metal foil. So wealth's mystique is removed, its intimidation is removed, we can see through it. But we're still getting the pleasure, and with that pleasure, a sense of a different kind of wealth, the wealth of ideas, as art processes contradictions.
Matthew Collings reveals how to decipher works by some of the greatest abstract artists at bbc.co.uk/yourpaintings. And he'll be hosting a live panel at the Tate Modern asking what is abstract art, broadcast on Free Thinking on Radio 3 next Wednesday. Tomorrow here on BBC4, architect Zaha Hadid profiles one of her great influences, Russian revolutionary, at 10.